Peggy Sass. I'm one of the volunteers here at the Agricultural Heritage Center, and we're going to talk about how families kept their food over the winter. They would have had a garden outside where they grew a lot of things that would give them food throughout the winter, but then they had to keep it. And they didn't have a big refrigerator with a big freezer like you have. It was a ways to town. Like Longmont now is just right over here from where we are. But in those days, 100 years ago, Longmont was a pretty small town and it wasn't very close here. You would have to go 3 miles that way and then another 3 miles that way before you'd be downtown where there were stores where you could buy groceries. And the other thing was, farm families didn't always have a lot of cash. Now they didn't feel poor because they had lots of land, a warm house, and plenty of food that they grew in their garden, but they had to make it last through the winter. So going to town was something they maybe do once a week to do some shopping, but they might not have a lot of ready money to hand over, so they tried to grow what they could. So here are some ways that they kept the food. Some things, like onions, would just keep over the winter if you kept them cool and dry. But other things you needed to preserve in some ways. And if you didn't have a big refrigerator with a big freezer, what would you do? This is one thing that you did. And they called it canning, even though these are jars, not cans. They called it canning. Or they said putting up. Like, I put up 12 quarts of beans this morning. So they would can it, they would cook it and then put it in jars. And they would be, in the really old days, they were like this, and probably 100 years ago, they were using jars like this. Nowadays, we use jars a little more like this if we can anything, because we usually don't. It's easier for us to go to the store and buy it in a real can, or to put it in the freezer. But since they didn't have a freezer, and town was a ways off, and this farm actually is closer to town than a lot of farms. So you can things. So you canned applesauce, you could can pickles, and pickles are made from cucumbers. So these are sliced up cucumbers and kept with some dill and some vinegar. You could can beans. These are green beans. And this is another kind of jar that you used in the very old days. So canning was a way that a farm family had to keep their food over the winter so that they could have fruits and vegetables all winter long and into the spring, because spring could be a hard time too. Not much is growing yet in the spring. So they needed this to last them some months through fall, winter, and spring.